All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Matt. I've been with the uh, Office of CAD and Mapping. Sorry for the last minute change in the schedule here. It was just a bit of a conflict that needed to be adjusted for. Um, I'm going to start recording this session now. And today's session is going to be, it was our open topic. So we're going to talk about modeling a cul-de-sac. Um, And as I said, we're recording this and these will be posted here online here in the next day or two. And with the rescheduling, I wasn't, or JD wasn't able to present his upcoming training here. So I'll skip through these real quick. These are the same slides that have been in previous webinars. So there is an upcoming ORD overview training November 2nd and 3rd, and that'll be an online Teams training. And you can enroll in that through o.learn. And don't forget about the wiki page, which is where we have one place where we're organizing all of our content, including these webinars. And I think we've started to also post the PowerPoint slides as well. And here's a list of the remaining webinars for this year. Today is obviously the open topics, as I mentioned. One thing to point out, the October session is going to have to be rescheduled. It's falling on the same day as OTEC. Um, so look for a change there that'll be coming. And I think this was talked about previously. The bi-monthly sessions have all been canceled for now. So I'm not sure when we'll pick those things back up again. And the internal CAD managers user group meeting will be November 18th. So you should have that on your calendar. If not, I think an invite should be forthcoming. And then lastly, we have the statewide CAD user group meeting just next week. And so there was a invite for that you could register and view the agenda. That stuff has all been sent out. And if you don't have that, feel free to contact one of us and we'll get you the information. And lastly, on the updates, before we get going, we received this email, I think in the last couple of days. You may have also received it. Bentley will be doing an upgrade or maintenance to their systems Saturday, September 5th between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. So the instruction here is they want everyone to log off prior to Saturday. So when you leave on the 4th, if you could log out of the Bentley connection client before you go home, that would probably be great. So that's about all I know there. Okay, so on to the cul-de-sac modeling. I don't have a whole lot of slides to go through. I'm just going to jump in and show some video here. Just an overview of the tools or the process that I use to create this. Obviously, with ORD, you need your horizontal and vertical geometry for your roadway. Then we're going to have some roadway template and get to that in a second. We'll create a corridor, which I've skipped in this review, but you need a corridor created. And then what we'll do is we'll define the center of the cul-de-sac. So we'll have some tools that we can do to create that. And then we can construct and profile the cul-de-sac edge of pavements. So we'll create the horizontal geometry for the edge of pavements, and then we'll give them some profiles. And then we'll create a cul-de-sac terrain or surface terrain and apply some linear templates, or apply a surface template. And then lastly, we would apply a linear template for the shoulders and end conditions. So let's get in and take a look. We're going to take a look at two different examples, a standard cul-de-sac and an offset cul-de-sac. There are some assumptions being made that you are familiar with the basics of Open Roads Designer, horizontal vertical geometry tools, creating and modifying a corridor, as well as creating and using a linear template and a surface template. I've already created a couple corridors and templates that we're going to use. And if we take a look at my template library, I have a simple roadway section, a shoulder section with some end conditions for my linear template, as well as a basic pavement build-up section for my surface template. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and slide my view to the right, where I have two new corridors already started waiting for us here. The first thing I need to do is create a center point for my cul-de-sac. And what I'm going to do is use the geometry point command to place the center point. So one thing to note is when I do this, the Ohio DOT standard did not have a great feature definition to be used for something like this, and that could be a possibility to add in the future. Maybe some sort of scratch point that's going to be visible. But so I'm going to leave this set as no feature definition for now. And then if I take a look at my my active symbology, I'm going to make this something that I can see easily in my view. So I'm going to make it a color of 4 and let's say a weight of 8 or maybe even 10 would be easiest to see. My elevation mode is going to be set to plan element. That way my point will come in at the elevation of the profile along my center line. So I'm going to go ahead and locate my plan element. My elevation offset is going to be 0, and then I need a data point where I want this to be. So I will snap to the end of my line. And now you see I have a yellow circle in both my plan and my 3D view. So now we're going to go ahead and use this center point to go ahead and create the edge of pavement for our cul-de-sac. And using my feature definition toggle bar, I'm just going to go ahead and set my active feature definition to the edge of pavement feature definition. And now I'm going to go ahead and use an arc between points. And I'm going to set my placement method is going to be a center and a radius, and my radius value is going to be 50. So I'm going to go ahead and accept these prompts, and I'm going to just pick 2 points and go ahead and create the back part of my cul-de-sac here. Next, what I'm going to do then is use a arc between elements, and I'm just going to place a 50 foot radius to connect the two from the edge of pavement from my corridor and the cul-de-sac edge of pavement that I just created. And I only want to trim the ahead element here. I want to leave my corridor alone. So I'll create this on each side, and it'll automatically trim back the extra from my cul-de-sac edge of pavement. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and just pull back my template drop for my corridor to the beginning of these first radius here. So now we have it's a little bit cleaner for us to work with here. Now we need to go ahead and define profiles for these 3 elements that we just created. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the back part of the cul-de-sac, and I'm going to open a profile view for it. Although we don't really need to, but I just wanted to show what's going to happen when we use the define a profile by a point from or by slope from a point command. So when I do that, I'm going to define the profile of this point, and I need to select the point from the 3D view now. And I'm going to use negative 1.6% slope. So a profile is created and it's automatically set to active in my 3D view. Next, we'll create a profile for sort of the radius returns that we created. And then I'm going to use the profile intersection point command to have the edge of pavement of our roadway and the edge of pavement of the cul-de-sac defined in my profile view. And then we'll connect the points to create an active profile for that edge of pavement. So one point is placed here, and then I select the other, and now I have 2 points here. Now I'm just going to use a line between points and connect the dots. And then I'll make this profile active. And while we're here, it should be worth noting that this is meant to be an example. The geometry that you may have could be different. This is not a design standard by any means. It's just to show the concept of modeling a cul-de-sac. So your profiles that you define, you may end up having to create with vertical curves, maybe to provide a low point, especially if you have some curb and gutter section going through there. You may need to find something better for drainage and those sort of situations. So moving on, we'll go ahead and do the exact same thing on the opposite side. And again, I'll locate these 2 points. And set this one active as well. Okay, now I have the basics of my cul-de-sac, but I do want to also create one other additional piece of geometry, and to do that I'm going to set my feature definition to scratch 2. And I want to create an element here across the edge of pavement. And this is because when we create our terrain for our proposed pavement, we need something to close this boundary off. Otherwise, it's going to follow the center line back to the beginning. So I'm just going to snap to the 2 edge of pavement points, and then I'll open a profile view for it. And then I'm going to use the same profile creation command with profile intersection points, and I'm going to locate the edge of pavement, my center line, and the other edge of pavement. And then I'll use a complex by PI profile to connect these dots, and then set this as active as well. So when you use the scratch element or the scratch feature definition, it's a little bit difficult to see, especially in your 3D view, what elements you have here. So one little trick you can do is if you go to your Home tab and you go to Manage your element templates, which is what the feature definition pulls from. And if I look at the Scratch 2 element template, it's just all set to the standard bi-level symbology. So if I change this maybe to red and maybe a weight of 4, so I can see it, we can see in our 3D view that has changed. Just a little bit easier for us to see, as well as in the plan view, it's also changed. And now we're ready to go ahead and create a terrain of our pavement surface, and then apply our surface template to that to add our pavement build up to apply the depth to it. So we will start by going to terrain and use the create from elements command. And my feature type is going to be set to boundary, and my edge method will be none. I also want to set my feature definition to proposed pavement surface. And then I'm just going to go ahead and select the 4 elements that we just created. And notice I get a couple contours here, but I still need to add in the break line. My center line is a break line to make the contours appear more like what you would expect to see here. So I'm going to go to feature management, I'll add a feature. From my 3D view, I'm going to select my terrain, and then I'll select the center line to add as my break line. And now you'll see those contours appear much more like what you would expect. So we're almost done now. Next thing we want to do is go ahead and go to modeling detailing, and I want to apply a surface template here just to give this to apply the pavement buildup to the terrain that we just created. So I'll select, I'm going to use the cul-de-sac surface template in my template library I showed earlier, and from my 3D view I'm going to select my terrain and then just data point through the prompts, and now you can see a pavement buildup was applied here. The last thing to do to finish this cul-de-sac out is apply a linear template to each one of these edge of pavement elements that will apply the shoulder and the grading end conditions to these pieces here. So there you have a simple way to model a standard cul-de-sac. So now let's go ahead and just take a look at the offset cul-de-sac. So I'll slide down to my other corridor here. And the concepts are the same in this case, except what I wanted to show was how to create a little bit of extra geometry needed to create the offset cul-de-sac, or that you're going to need to also create the surface template or surface terrain. So by doing that, I'm going to keep my feature definition set to Scratch 2, and I'm going to go to my geometry tab. And what I want to do is create a line from an element. And I've already populated the dimensions that I'm going to need here. So what I'm going to do is select my center line, and my offset is 0. And I'm just going to, I don't really care where I start at this point. You may have a point that you want to start this at. This is going to be where the center is perpendicular to the center line. So you may be able to use Civil AccuDraw to locate your exact starting point. I'm just going to data point a point here, and I want it to go to the south, so 270 degrees here, and I want it to be an offset of 38 feet. Now I'm going to place an arc between points, and I want to set my method here to start and end, pass through. And then I'm going to snap to the end of this line, and I'm going to work backwards. And my radius value here is going to be 143 feet. And then my endpoint, I'm going to use a tangent snap, make my endpoint tangent to my center line. And then I'll data point through to place that. And the reason I did that this way is that if I wanted to move the center point of my cul-de-sac, I can pick this geometry up and just move it wherever I need it to go. And then this point, or this arc that we created, is going to turn into our break line. And that would move with it as well. So now we need to just go ahead and apply a profile to each one of these elements. So I'm going to select this offset line here, and I'm going to do the same thing I did previously. I'm going to use the profile intersection point to come up with the elevation at my center line. And that point's created in my profile view. Then I'm going to create a line, and I am going to toggle on my Civil AccuDraw here. I'm going to create a line beginning at that point, and I'm going to do it by a slope. So my end station is going to be 0 plus 38, and I want this to be negative 1.6%. So then we'll set this active, and we'll create a profile now for our arced element here. And again, I'm going to use the profile intersection point to create my centerline point as well as my offset point. Oops. And then I'll set this active as well. And then the last thing we can do to create our center point is use the point command. And again, this is set to no feature definition. And I want to set this at the end of that center line. So now I have my center point that I'm going to use to create. That point will then be used to create the profile for the cul-de-sac element, or the edge of pavement element. Now I'm going to go ahead and create the edge of pavement components or elements here. So I'm going to set my feature definition back to the edge of pavement, and I'm going to use the same commands I used previously. I'll do an arc between points. Again, I need to change my method back to center radius, and my radius value I'll set to 50. And then I'm just going to snap to the center point. I'll just pick 2 points to create this. And then I'll do an arc between, a simple arc between elements. And again, I'll use a 50-foot radius here. Select my edge of pavement from my corridor, and then select the cul-de-sac edge of pavement. And I'll trim the ahead part of it. Now what I'm going to do is move back the corridor to the beginning of this radius, which leaves us one more edge of pavement component that we need to go ahead and place. So what I'll do here is I'm going to use a single offset partial, and my offset value is going to be 12 feet, the same as the lane. I'll select my center line, I'll select my begin point, and I'm just going to extend it beyond the cul-de-sac there. Then what I can do is go to the drawing tab, and I can just use the MicroStation, extend the elements or trim the elements, and trim those two together. Then I'll also just go ahead and create the last piece that we needed to create our boundary for our surface terrain. Okay, so now we have our horizontal geometry all created. I've started a profile for my boundary point there. And now let's go ahead and profile the edge of pavement elements. And I'm going to go ahead and set my feature definition back to edge of pavement. And then I'll use, again, you're going to use the define profile by slope from a point. And I need to select my point from the 3D view. And again, I'll use a negative 1.6%. Now I can do the same thing here. Okay, now that we have all of our edge of pavements and our break lines are profiled, we can go ahead and create our surface terrain. So we'll go to terrain, create, and go to from elements, and we'll select the edge of pavement and our boundary line here. Again, feature definition is set to pavement surface, and my feature type is set to boundary. So now you see a couple contours were created, but we need to go ahead and add in this last arc as our break line. So we'll add a feature, select our terrain, and then locate the break line. So there our contours look nice and smooth like we would expect. And then to finish the rest of this out, we will apply our surface template. for our pavement buildup, and then apply a linear template for the remaining elements for our shoulder and our grading. Okay, so sorry the video might have been a little bit grainy there. I do have I think that my original video should be better, and I'll probably post that separately on the wiki page so you can come back to that one as well without the slides. But I didn't mention earlier is we had actually received a couple requests for something like this, and one of the requests had asked about how to maybe apply some ditches to the cul-de-sac. And that was after I started to create some of this. So what we'll see in the next video is that I adjusted the profile of my corridor, and as you can tell from this screenshot here, there's no ditches. So I adjusted the profile to be lower so that it would force the end condition to create some ditch. So what you'll see here is our corridor that we had previously and our cul-de-sac that we had previously, but I lowered the profile of my corridor so that my cul-de-sac would be in cut so that the end condition would force in a ditch here. And what I want to do is reprofile this or use a point control to kind of move this horizontally as well as vertically to create a high point so that my drainage could go, or the water would drain back to the corridor itself. Obviously, you could also use it to create a low point if you had a catch basin or something you were putting in somewhere along here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the geometry commands to, I'm just going to place an arc here. We could use any of the other geometry that you want. You could put in some lines and curves and create whatever geometry you wanted to, for that horizontally. So I'm just going to start with an arc, and I'm going to do the start, end, and pass through. And I'm just going to snap to the end of this ditch here, and then I'll snap to the end on this side. And for my second or my third point here, I'm just going to pick a point. I'm not real concerned with where it's going to be for this demo. So then once I have this line here, let me back up one step. I do have on my feature definition toolbar, I have the scratch alignment set, as well as my use active feature definition. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm not going to worry about the feature definitions or naming them. But obviously, in your case, you'll want to use caution or use care when which feature definition to use and how you're going to name them so that they make sense down the road. Okay, so now the next step will be to go ahead and create a profile view of this. And what I want to do now is I want to see where my edge of shoulder is in relationship to this new line that I created in vertically speaking. So I'm going to use the project profile to element. So what I'm going to do is select my edge of shoulder, and the tool will then project it to the line that I want. So when I here data point on my new ditch geometry, a new line will be created in my profile view. And notice that that was automatically set to be my active profile. That's not going to be the profile we're going to use for our point control. So you'll notice that'll change here in a minute. The next thing I'd want to see in this view is maybe where my ditch line is currently designed. So I'm going to select the inside of this ditch, and then I'm going to project it also onto that same alignment. So we'll see that this is flat, and obviously we need to make some changes here. Now the last thing I want to do is, because once we use our point control and define this ditch line is going to move. So this projection was also going to change once we do this. So I'm going to want to see the profile intersection point where my horizontal geometry intersects kind of the other ditches that we were tying into on each side. So I'll select my new geometry, and then I'll select the inside of each ditch here that I'm tying into. And you'll see that these magenta points appear in our profile view. So now I'm ready to go ahead and create my proposed profile. And I'm just going to use a profile complex by PI. You could do this various ways. You can add in various geometry if you needed. I'm just going to pick my profile view, snap to my begin point. So I'm going to add a high point here in the middle, and then I'll snap to my other intersection point there. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and set this profile to active. And you'll notice in my 3D view that red line, or that scratch geometry line, will move just ever so slightly to match this profile that we just created. Next, what I'm ready to do is go ahead and add a point control to control this both horizontally and vertically. But before I do that, I need to go to corridors, and I need to add this as a corridor reference so that the corridor knows that it's there. So I'm going to locate my corridor, and then I'll select the reference element, and then I'll just reset to complete it. So that process pretty quick. In this scenario, you had a bigger project, you might see it take a couple of seconds, but we can double check that it's there by going to our corridor objects. And if we just select or locate the corridor and look at our external reference, we'll see that that corridor reference was added in. And again, we use a correct naming convention or something that makes better sense, we'll obviously see that name there as well. And while I'm here, I'll just point out that there's no point control here, and I could go ahead and add that from this dialog, or I can also go to my edits command and click on create point control. So I'm going to just do it from this dialog. And this is already set to lock to start and end for me. So I'm just going to keep those as I want, and then you can add a description as you feel necessary. I want to locate my point now. This is the point from the template or from my end condition that I want this point control to control. So I want the inside ditch line, and notice in the dialog then the point is populated here. You could also pick from the drop-down list. Generally, it's going to be easier to locate it in plan view if you can. Now I want to control this by both horizontally and vertically. So the mode here is going to be both. Again, you can select from the drop-down horizontal or vertical. So I'll data point to accept that, and I want this to control it by linear geometry, and then I'll data point here. You have some other options such as a feature definition or corridor feature. We're going to use linear geometry here. Next, it's asking me to locate my plan or profile element. So I'm just going to select in my plan view my new geometry here. And since my active profile is defined as scratch 3, I can just data point to accept. And once that plan element was selected, it was also populated in the dialog. And again, you could select from the dropdown and pick any of those. And then once the plan element is selected, the profile should populate here or give you whatever options you might have. So we're going to data point to accept that. We don't want to use a secondary alignment, and the rest of these prompts I'm just going to data point through to accept. I don't want any horizontal or vertical offsets. So we'll see now in our corridor objects dialog box, our point control was added, and we can come in and we can review any of these, or we could even change any of them, or even just toggle it on or off if we didn't want to see it. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to toggle this off. I'm going to go back to our original condition, and then when I toggle this back on, you can see that my ditch was adjusted to both horizontally and vertically to follow that scratch alignment that I created. One last thing that we can do to take a look at this is if I open a profile view here, or excuse me, a cross-section view, and I can open, and I'll just start a new cross-section view. I'm going to locate my corridor, select my view, and if I kind of scroll through these, you'll see that my ditch was adjusted, and because of how far this is away, obviously that really flattens out that slope there. And then we can see as we get back around the other side, as it starts coming back in closer, it looks more like what you might expect. Last thing is, if in our cross-section view, we can go ahead and let's say we want to toggle that point control back off. We can see, and then scroll back through our cross-section view, you'll see that the normal condition is there. So that's just a couple, or one way to show or modify a ditch. And this can be done not just on a cul-de-sac, but really any corridor that we have, we can apply a special ditch profile by using the similar commands. Okay, so I wanted to just stop here and see if there's any questions. Just for the remainder of the hour, I did have some other tips and tricks I was going to share, but it kind of changes topics, so thought take a break here and see if there's any questions. It's like JD had answered one that was in the chat. Anything else from anybody? Okay, so what I wanted to talk about is I just wanted to fill the last part of this hour with some what I'm just going to call some tips and tricks on kind of the graphical user interface, and how to work with the ribbon a little bit better, and maybe add in some KEYINs, and that's really the bulk of what I'm going to talk about, is using KEYINs to kind of optimize your workflows. Here we got a nice screenshot, and this goes back quite a while. The graphical user interface has sort of come a long way over the years. This was kind of the earliest screenshot I could find from version 5 from back in the mid 90s on a DOS operating system. It sort of happened to be the first version I briefly touched until MicroStation 95 came out, which was like version 5.5 on a Windows operating system. So that was that there. And then we had MicroStation J, or version 7, came out, and the interface mostly remained the same in all of those versions. And then you fast forward to the new century in 2000. Excuse me, there's SE, then J, and then get into the 2000s. We had version 8.1, which I couldn't find a good screenshot of, and then to 8.5, which is also called the 2004 edition, followed by 8.9, which is the XM edition. Again, the interface mostly remained the same, basically with the main toolbar always being docked over on the upper left. And then finally, we get to V8i, where the main toolbar was still available, but largely replaced with the task toolbar, and which is what I think most users will recognize prior to Connect Edition products. So now we have the ribbon interface. But why do I bring all these up? It's just kind of show the progression of the interface, the task dialog, the ribbon interface, and kind of bring the biggest change, and seem to worry and frustrate users. Just they feel like they won't be able to be as productive as, they might have to refine where things are at. So I'm just going to show a couple of tips and tricks, which include MicroStation. Basically, when a lot of this, I just say MicroStation, which also includes ORD as well. So hopefully I learned something new, or maybe it'll just be a refresher. So the first one here. So if you're tight on screen real estate, we can, especially while working remotely, someone shared their desktop in one of the trainings we did, and they just had a real tiny little postage stamp to work with. So if you don't want it to take up so much space, what we can do is, if I can start the video, there we go. Collapse the ribbon just by double clicking on any of the tab headings. And then you can use the tabs just like you would pull down menus. And then to dock it again, you could just double click the menu. There's also a little caret over in the upper right that you will do the exact same thing. So these function the exact same as they would in Microsoft Office. You know, Excel and Word have the same functionality. I didn't include it here, but you can also use the wheel on your mouse to scroll through the tabs on each workflow as well. Now let's say you're working on your model, but you just want to place a cell real quickly or something, maybe place a line, and you don't know where the cell command is, you don't want to navigate away to go find that. So you can use the search ribbon in the upper right for a couple things. When I type in cell here, you'll see it shows me where the cell command is located. In this case, I have 4 different menus. By clicking on one of them, it'll take you to where the workflow is located. And we can also use the ribbon just to activate the command. So if I select on the cell here, it'll bring up the cells dialog. The last example here I show is how to search maybe the Ohio DOT application. So again, you might want to create a new file without having to browse over to the Ohio DOT workflow. So to get to the Create Design Files app here, you can launch it right from there. And I don't show it here, but there was also a history that will show your list of recently used or your searched items that you can go back to and look for later. So the search can be helpful in a couple of different ways. You can find a command to either open it directly or to find where that's located in the ribbon menu there. So now we've talked about searching by a KEYIN. Let's take a look at some actual KEYIN commands and shortcut KEYINs. Uh, what I'm talking about is actually using the KEYIN dialog box and not necessarily like keyboard shortcuts like Control E or any of those sorts of things. So I did just want to share these, give you another way or ways to navigate and potentially avoid getting lost in the ribbon. In some cases, you might find some of these KEYINs helpful, other you may not. Generally speaking, KEYINs aren't used as much as they were by users in the past, and why is that? It's just as we looked at earlier, the graphical interface of the new versions has improved, and users generally have learned where their top 20 commands or so are, so they're comfortable finding those and may have even customized their user interface, whether it was be a custom toolbar or just docking the toolbars they use most often. But I'd also say most of the time, many users that I talk to don't really know how to use KEYINs effectively. So just about any function that MicroStation performs can be activated with or manipulated with a KEYIN. And when might you use those? It's going to be definitely useful as you do repetitive tasks. And we can also use KEYINs to take advantage of shortcut KEYINs, which are reduced to 2 letters. So we'll look at a couple of those here in a minute. And we can set commonly used KEYINs to function keys to kind of further increase your productivity. So if you're always use 1 or 2 commands, we can find the KEYINs for that and set it to a function key or even create a custom menu. You can also search the MicroStation Connect online help for a list of KEYIN commands with the link that's here. And what I show here is all the Bentley help content is now online rather than built into the product. So you can use that link to get to the product documentation and choose the product you're using. I've noticed in general, MicroStation commands or KEYINs are the documentation is much better using the MicroStation help rather than the ORD help, even though ORD is built right on top of MicroStation. So KEYINs can be combined with a semicolon, so we can do several things at once. KEYINs individually or combined can be used in a batch process. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that though today. So alone or together, for someone like me who really isn't a programmer, you might find something like that you do a lot can be combined and automate your workflow with your own little script. Again, I'm not going to look at batch process, but I just wanted to point out that if you find yourself doing a lot of these, we can build a list of KEYINs, and MicroStation will run those KEYINs against a list of the files that you specify. So if you don't have the KEYIN window open, you can open it from the primary group and shown in the red circle there. The same screenshot shows the KEYIN dialog being docked in the red rectangle. When docked, you have the run icon, the same as pressing enter, and you have the browse KEYINs icon. The browse icon will show the same list boxes that you see in the fully expanded window there at the bottom screenshot. Each list sort of corresponds to a keyword level in the hierarchy of the KEYIN language. So as you begin to key in a command, the list boxes to the right will populate with more options. This way, even if you're not sure what the actual KEYIN should be, you can start to type and it'll help you determine what your options are. And the bottom area is your KEYIN history, which you can also scroll through with the up and down arrow keys, even when the dialog is docked there. So this is a list of 2-letter shortcut KEYINs. You can find various versions of this list online. This is actually from one of the other ODOTs. Oklahoma has a really nice guide at the link here, so we'll give them credit and not reinvent the wheel. The highlighted shortcut KEYINs are what I'd say are probably the most frequently used. Some of the text and symbology ones may not be used as much with the text styles and bi-level symbology that are used today. But there are cases that could still be useful. In say in that previous demo I did where I was placing the center point and I would change my color, I could use some of these shortcuts. So CO equals color 3 or 4 or whatever the color was I used. We also have KEYIN precision inputs such as DI equals DL equals DX and XY equals. So there are various ways to achieve these, especially with AccuDraw, but I still find myself frequently using a lot of these commands. These would generally be used with basic MicroStation elements, but do also work with ORD's civil geometry. So looking at each one individually, DI equals will give you your distance, comma, your direction. So in that example I showed is 124.54. We'll draw a line at, or let's suppose I'm drawing a line and it'll draw a line 124 feet long and 270 degrees, so it'll be straight down. DL will give us our distance along our x-axis, and oops, there's a typo there. It should be distance x, comma, distance y for both DL and DX. So DL will work along the design plane axis, but if you're in a rotated view, you're going to want to use DX. So that'll work along the view axis there. So if I were to draw a line in both of those examples, it would be 100 feet along the x-axis and 45 feet along the y. And then lastly, XY equals. This will work also in a 3D view with Z. So we can do X, comma, Y, comma, Z. Maybe you just received one coordinate from somebody, or maybe it's from existing plans and you just want to find that point where it's at. We can place a point, or we can even draw a line between 2 points by keying in XY equals and entering in those coordinates. So these might be kind of old school for some of you who may have been around for a while, but if you're new, I would encourage you to kind of look at some of those. And lastly, a lot of the, if not all, the ODOT custom applications, if you look in the help documentation, there are KEYINs to also load those. So in this case, MDL load, Ohio DOT, Sheet Manager will load in the Sheet Manager application. So again, if you find yourself using one or two of those more often than the others, and you want to set that to a function key, that could be how you could do it. Typing that each time may not be worth it. So you may just navigate to the menu at that point. But so I have a couple examples. Let's just take a quick look. I'm going to start by looking at a couple KEYIN shortcuts. Let's look at the level symbology first. So if we look at our active symbology, everything's set to default at the moment. So if I use LV equals SC underbar scratch 1, for example, see that my active level is now changed to scratch 1. Now, if I want to change, or well, if you look at our color, weight, and line style, we'll see those are all set to by level. So that automatically changes with when we change our level. But maybe there's a case if we're doing a public meeting exhibit or something, and maybe just on a scratch level, you wanted to change the color, for example. We can just do CO equals 3, and that'll change our color to red. We can even do an LC equals 3, and that'll change us to line code of 3. And we could do a weight equals 5, and we'll see that our active weight is now changed, and we can draw lines or do whatever we need to do from there. If you like to use those options, or if those are settings you might want to do frequently, we could put those all together and even add them to a function key. So let's try that. So I'll use some different settings here so we can see some things change. So if we do level or LV equals scratch 2, and I'm going to add a line here or add another key in with this separated with a semicolon, and I'll do CO equals 7 and line code equals 5, for example, and then maybe another semicolon and WT equals a weight of 10. So when I hit enter, those all change for me. So that could be handy if those are some things you like to do often. Now I want to take a look at a couple other the shortcut keyins, as I call them. I'm going to just do AA equals, and that would be for setting your active angle. So maybe you want to set your active angle for rotation or place a line at a certain angle. You could do that. But first, I can see what my active angle is by doing AA equals and then just pressing enter. And we'll see in our display at the bottom of our window there that my active angle is set to 0. So now I can change that by doing act or AA equals and maybe setting that to 45, and we'll notice that our active angle changes. The same thing can happen with an active scale, which is AS equals. I can check my scale. It's actually set to 20, and it's displaying the axis or the scale for all 3 axes, so X, Y, and Z. And if I change AS equals to 50, we'll see that my X and Y scale changed to 50, but Z stayed at 1, which is typically the case. Now let's look at a situation I find myself in often, and we'll assume the same for most, particularly with ORD workflow. You might want to just move or copy a scratch element, or maybe place a new element or a piece of text, but really don't want to take the time to navigate away from the workflow you're on to find the place line command, or only to have to navigate your way back. I know it's only a few clicks here and there, but we all get lazy and you may get distracted in the meantime. But what I'm really trying to do here is give you another way to customize or another way of thinking about your workflow and how you can become more efficient. So let's look at a place line, for example. So I have this all set to all caps just so I can demonstrate what I'm typing in versus what's auto-populating or auto completing here. So as I begin to type place for the place line command, you'll see that that word is sort of auto finish for me. So all I have to do is hit the space bar and finish. Now I can start to type line, and then I can hit space bar to finish the line word. So I just typed in PL space LI space, and now I'm in the place line. I'll hit enter here. I'm automatically in the place line command, and it's asking me to enter my first point. So I could data point on the screen here, and then I could data point twice here to place my line. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and use some of the precision inputs that I talked about earlier. So I do an X, Y equals, say 1,000, 1,500, and then press enter, and that's going to set my first point of my line. And then maybe I want maybe I don't want a data point just to end it, and I want to do another precision input. I could do a DI equals 1,000. So I want a 1,000-foot long line, and I want it drawn at 55 degrees, and I've placed my line there. So now I'm just going to go ahead and place another line with 2 points here, and then maybe I want to trim those together. So I'm just going to use the trim command, and I'll trim one of these to the other one. So we could also do maybe a trim to intersection, and we could do it where it would trim both lines together as well. So with what I just did there, I placed 2 lines and never really had to navigate away from changing the ribbon settings that I currently was looking at. So hopefully they'll find that that's kind of useful and less clicks to move around and locate the commands that you want. There are a couple commands that I've never been able to find an actual icon for, and it actually stems back to days when we had some digitizer tablets with some menus on them. So I do use these quite frequently. There's 2 of them, and they're pretty much the same command, but it's construct perpendicular to and from are my options. So if I want to create a perpendicular line from an element, I can enter that in, select the element I want to draw it from, or snap to the beginning and end, and I have my perpendicular line. Let me place another line. Oh, actually, I can just do it this way. I can do a construct perpendicular to, and I can just data point to begin somewhere out here. Oh no, I need a data point one of these. And so it'll be perpendicular line from the first element I select to wherever the second point is that I might select. And maybe that is the middle of this element. So those aren't on any particular toolbar that I've ever been able to find. So if you find one of those, let me know. Another shortcut key I wanted to share is that we could also do an active cell. So maybe we wanted to add a couple cells in our file, but we didn't want to have to go navigate to the cell library that I showed earlier. By the way, before I get there, we also looked at using the search ribbon to find the cells dialog. I could also key that in with a dialog cell. Will bring up the cell library dialog, just like we looked at earlier. That really wasn't where I was going with this, but anyways, we can use if we notice when I did do that though, there's no cell library attached. So even without a cell library attached, I can key in AC for active cell, and maybe I want to place a power pole, which I know the cell name is PP. I can AC equals PP and press enter, and there I have my power pole being ready to be located. And if I did not like the scale of that, I can do active scale equals 20 and get that back to where it needs to be for my particular drawing. I can even change the active angle with the AA equals, maybe say I want these all set to 90. So you'll see cell was rotated, and now I can place it in my file. And lastly, again, I could use one of the precision inputs to place it at maybe XY equals, say 2500, comma 2500. ORD civil geometry also has some key-ins. Some are rather lengthy, and you may not find them as useful just because it is a lot of keystrokes to get those in. But if you are doing a repetitive command or using it as on a function key or something like that, you may want to be aware that those are there. So just as for an example, if I key in geometry, line, and then place, I'm going to do a line between 2 points. And then I can use the same precision inputs that we used earlier. For example, so if I do it XY equals, and I'll use different values, 2000, comma 2000, it will begin my line here. And then maybe I just want to make that line be 1,000 feet long. and at 45 degrees. So now if I select that line, we'll see that our civil geometry, it was created, whereas these are just regular MicroStation elements. So probably should have changed my color there, but you get the point. And then we have the same handlebars and those sort of things. So that could be useful in cases where maybe you just wanted to place a quick line or something like that, and you didn't really want to toggle on your civil AccuDraw, or maybe you're more comfortable using the KEYINs as inputs. So the same in line with the ORD civil geometry KEYINs. If we wanted to do a corridor point control, we can do corridor point control create, and that will bring us into the create point control dialog. So just some ways to, again, possibly speed up your workflow or maybe add some other features to the way you work. You can also use a KEYIN to attach a reference file. So we can key in reference, attach, and then we would key in the file name, and we could have that attach the reference file to our DGN that we're working in. So that's one way to do it. There's also a shortcut that we can do RF equals and key in the file name .dgn, and that will do the same thing. There are some additional options that can be added when using this KEYIN, and you would separate those with commas. And what it could do is you could specify the model that you would attach. You could add a logical name, a description, what view you want it to attach, say the scale, whether you want live nesting on or off, and whether you even want the display of that reference file turned on or off. So you could actually attach it, but have it turn off of the display. The order of those is important, but I'll let you look up the help document if you want to learn more about those. And I'll show just one quick example in a second. In general, you'll probably find RF really handy, especially to attach a fieldbook file. The caveat here is that the ms_refdir variable must be defined in your work set. And maybe we should even look at adding that to our overall Ohio DOT config file. So that it would point to the folders where to find a DGN file. So I have that set in this data set here. So if I key in RF equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this is my sample dark 185 project, and I do FB001.DGN. When I hit enter, then I'm prompted with the attach reference dialog here. And I can click OK. But I'm going to click cancel in a second, but take a look at the logical name and the description. So I can change that with my KEYIN before it's even attached, if I were to want to do something like that. And I could also change, whether my live nesting is turned on or whether I want my allow overrides on or off. All those things can be sort of be controlled at the time of attachment. So I'll hit cancel here, and I'm going to do RF equals again. Actually, I'm going to use the up arrow, and if you notice down at the bottom part of this is kind of my KEYIN history. I can select on these and it'll populate the KEYIN list again, and I could hit enter and do that, or I could just use it to start from. Additionally, if I clear that out, I can use the up and down arrows to go through all the recent KEYINs that I've had, so I can find those quickly. Even if it's docked, I can browse through my history with my up and down arrows. So let me get back to this one, and I'm going to add a semicolon here. No, sorry, add a comma. And I want to make sure that I tell it I'm going to attach the fb.dgn file, or .001, excuse me, fb001.dgn, and I want to make sure it's attaching the design model. That could be handy if you have a lot of models in one particular file. And then I want to set my logical name to maybe test, and I'll give a description of ODOT. So those are all separated by commas. Now when I hit enter, you see that my logical name is set to test and my description is set to ODOT. And I think the only model here is the design model. But if you had multiple ones, that was how that would be set. And then all I have to do is click OK, and my file should be attached. And it's way up here. So there also is a KEYIN that you can use to set your terrain active, which is, let me key that in. Geometry, terrain model, set active. And what that can do then is hit enter, and it will prompt us to locate the terrain that we want to set active. So as I said before, we could attach our fieldbook file and set the terrain active without ever leaving maybe this home tab that we have here. Those are likely the first couple of things you're going to do when working in ORD, is attach those files and set the terrain active. What's sort of missing, and I may file an enhancement request to Bentley, is to be able to do a set terrain active and then set the name of the terrain here. So what I'd like to be able to do is, I think the name is called DAR 185 survey. I'd like to be able to tell it what terrain I want to set active without having any other interaction here by selecting the terrain file. So it may submit that as an enhancement request. It could probably be done with some other programming as of right now. Might add that to my to-do list and maybe dabble in that and getting my feet wet with some VBA in the future. So just in closing, I did not go through, and it would be impossible to go through all the different KEYINs, all the different options. But if you find yourself doing a repetitive task, or you don't want to navigate away from some of the ribbons to find something that you're only going to do once, maybe. I didn't talk about it as well as the batch process. So if we're doing the same thing in many files over and over again, we could do the same. We could set up a script essentially of KEYINs that we want MicroStation to process on every single file. So I think I've said it a couple times now. I was just trying to give you ways to enhance your workflows or maybe improve upon some things you're doing now. And this is one good way. It's sort of old-fashioned and maybe in some cases a little bit antiquated, given some of the commands that are out there today. But you'll find some of them can be very useful in the right situations. Okay, so if you don't take anything away from that, maybe using the RF equals or reference attach KEYINs will be really helpful for just attaching your fieldbook file as you create new drawings going forward. So with that, we can open it up to any questions. I saw that Eric had answered one in the chat, so thanks, Eric. Anything else anybody has?
Hey, Matt, this is Ian Coley with District 1.
Hey.
Have you guys used positional mapping shortcuts at all? You know how they do that in Select Series 10 with the ribbon and stuff?
Oh, you mean using the keyboard buttons to open up?
Yeah, like like 1, 2, 3, and
yeah.
And then
I've seen a lot of people use those, so those could be something that you might like to do. I've never really taken advantage of it, but I've walked into some people's cubicles and they're just hitting buttons all the time, and they know which ones they want. You know, it might be 1, 2, 3 brings up place line or something like that. But I can't say that I have a whole lot of experience. Just personally, I haven't gotten into it.
Okay. Yeah, I use it a lot with SS10, and I got to figure out if it's worth trying to pursue how to figure it out on ORD, but we'll see.
It is built in there. It might be a toggle you have to toggle on in the preferences. I can't remember. I did see it somewhere.
Yeah, this is Eric. I'll chime in on that. We left it off by default in the default user preferences. Most of people, I don't use it either, like Matt. Most people that ask me about it are coming from an AutoCAD background, and the way it functions is a lot different than keyboard commands in AutoCAD because it's context related to the menu you're on. So it's not like, you know, one is always the same command. It changes based on what menu you're on, but it's just in your user preferences if you want to turn it on there and play with it. It's just positional mapping, I think.
Yep.
You've probably already looked at it.
Yeah, when I was going to use ORD more, I started digging into it, and but I just haven't got it I haven't been able to use it enough to see if it's worth pursuing. So if anyone's played with it and has had luck, that'd be good feedback.
Yeah, I'm not the guy to ask. I'm not real fond of it. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good
it's
deal.
turned off. It's just under user preferences, position mapping. The checkbox up the top is use position mapping. And, if that's something that users want, we can turn it on by default in the preferences. So the next time you update your preferences, it would be on.
So I'm a little embarrassed by the typo I had on my slide with the precision inputs, the X and Y value there. But I've never really gotten into using AccuDraw either. So that's why I talked about the precision key and inputs as well. So those generally is what I would use more often than using actually MicroStation AccuDraw. Now, Civil AccuDraw, that's probably another story. There's a lot more there that you're going to need to know and need to use at some point. JD says AccuDraw is the only way to go.
I agree with him.
Really? Yeah. All right, if there's nothing else, I'm going to close the session here, and we'll talk to you guys all next time.
Thanks, Matt.